In point of fact, Rabelais was the originator of quite a few sayings, and if you've ever heard this expression, tell the truth and shame the devil, that was from Francois Rabelais. Anyway, since the very beginnings of the human race, there have been those who instinctively understood the nature of reality and sought to impose their will upon it. This was not by the means of hard physical labour, but by cooperating with and honouring the forces that governed it. Most failed to achieve this skill, but others, a tiny few, achieved remarkable success and through their abilities exerted a degree of control over their fellows and even the elements themselves. They were the shaman, and it was from the early beginnings that this first order of magicians emerged, whose abilities were recognised, lauded and feared in equal measure by others in their tribal groups. Then came the magicians, whose near limitless influence and talents often terrified their neighbours much more than any threats of physical violence. But these secretive and elusive men and women could attack in ways that were incredibly subtle and of which there was no possible means of escape. Psychic attack was a typical version, and these attacks could come from anywhere. But the most alarming often came when the victims were asleep, for in their dreams their attacker waited for them in a half-world, where anything was possible and everything seemed real, and supposed subjectively was real. It was not unknown for those attacked in this manner to die in their sleep while their bodies were the bloody wounds of a fierce battle. And this had all been while they were lying asleep, apparently safe in their beds. As time passed and the secrets possessed by these individuals were refined and developed, they gradually became part of the natural order of things, and in addition to their fearsome powers, they also became recognised as healers, soothsayers and prophets. For centuries, their methods, although harbouring great risk, were simple and founded on the immense and pervasive powers that drive nature itself. The development of Egyptian and Greek mystery schools also contributed to magical lore and knowledge, and produced many improvements to magical techniques, but always it was in secret and hidden from view. There were many early magicians. I suppose the best known of them would be the likes of John Dee, Cagliostro, Eliphas Levi, and modern magicians like Gerald Gardner, who actually created the concept of Wicca, Kenneth Grant and Jack Parsons, and I'll be coming to Jack Parsons a little bit later on. And of course, the wickedest man in the world, Aleister Crowley, whose name is still spoken with fearful reverence as one of the most powerful and influential magicians who ever lived. For almost a century, his reputation, I better add that, the great beast of Revelation 666, just to think of going to insult him, we're leaving it out. Even in death, rumours still abound of curses that can somehow reach from beyond the grave to punish anyone who dares to attack or criticise him or his works. He eventually became a debauched, drug-addicted, self-aggrandizing parody of his former self, relishing and wallowing in his reputation as the wickedest man in the world and the great beast of Revelation 666. Both descriptions were awarded to him, perhaps unfairly I have to say, by a largely hypocritical and easily scandalised public, and eagerly encouraged by sensation-hungry newspapers and by the whims of their often straight-laced proprietors. Crowley is sometimes dismissed as a charlatan by certain modern occult practitioners, but he was extremely charismatic and possessed an amazing natural talent and gift for self-publicity, and a genuine belief in the powers of sorcery, especially his own. The reason why he should have become so obsessed with the occult and ritual magic, especially its dark side, are obscure, but almost certainly lie in his childhood. He was born Edward Alexander Crowley in October 1875, and his upbringing reflected his parents' adherence to a fundamentalist and obsessive Christian sect, the Plymouth Brethren. This is a sect that believes the Bible is transcribed from the literal word of God and is convinced that apart from them, the rest of the world's population is condemned to burn in everlasting hellfire. The year of Crowley's birth was also the year of the great French occultist and magician Eliphas Levi. He died then. And this is when his gifts began to develop, and Crowley proclaimed himself to be the reincarnation of the dead sorcerer. He also enhanced his credentials by altering his name to Aleister, A-L-E-I-S-T-E-R, quite an unusual spelling, because he believed that this change in numerology would help bring him fame. Although his family lived to the letter of the Bible, it did not prevent him from enjoying an excellent lifestyle from the proceeds of a brewery owned by his father. Presumably the demon drink was, and in this case, quite acceptable, an attitude that reflects the double standards and pretense that are common in very wealthy and ostensibly God-fearing families. Unfortunately for the young Crowley, when his father died in 1878, he became the sole recipient of his mother's obsessive and fanatical religious zeal. On more than one occasion, she actually accused him of being the great beast of Revelation, whose number was 666. Whether there was any justification for this, we shall never know, but it's much more likely that his mother, driven by her unthinking fanaticism, thought any display of unapproved thought that deviated from the biblical orthodoxy as being the devil's work. But whatever the cost, for the rest of his life, he devoted his best efforts to live up to the reputation. And perhaps he may even have actually come to believe that he really was the biblical beast of the Old Testament. Anyway, he was forcibly sent to school for sons of the brethren, and through his experiences there, he came to loathe and hate the sect and the austere and unyielding version of Christianity that it represented. It was a revulsion endured throughout his long life. At one point, he considered that his upbringing left him with two things: a thorough knowledge of the Bible and an equally thorough hatred of it. At 21, Crowley inherited a legacy of £30,000 from his father's estate, a sum that is worth the equivalent of some £3.5 million in today's terms. And in October 1895, he enrolled as a student at Trinity College in England. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a little drink for a second. My throat's a little bit dry. Here his life became totally transformed, and he discovered works that, because of his mother's religious mania, had previously been banned to him. He sought out and devoured the works of Coleridge, Swift and Carlyle, and other books that expanded his ideas of what was possible. Now, following his thoroughly enjoyable time spent at university, he planned to join the British diplomatic service, and his heart became set upon an attachment to the court of Imperial Russia. This was a period in his life when his outlook radically altered, and he embarked on an intense and lifelong voyage of personal spiritual discovery, although his interpretation of what was spiritual might not exactly be yours or mine. But immediately prior to taking up the diplomatic post at the court of the Russian royal family, he encountered an alchemist called Julian Baker, and this awakened his realization of the power and possibilities in, as he styled it, magic, spelt M-A-G-I-C-K. Many have asked why he chose to spell the word magic in this manner, and he readily admitted that it was intended to make it clear that he regarded magic as something utterly valid and real, totally different from the mechanical and artificial magic performed by stage illusionists and conjurers. So apart from his abiding interest in this esoteric subject, there were other skills that he possessed. One of these was a well-deserved reputation and passion for mountaineering, and the other was a remarkable degree of skill at chess. It was perhaps typical of the heavily biased and ill-informed press coverage of the day that his talents in neither of these fields was ever recognised, and the tabloids then were no differently other than they are today, and the truth always was a poor second to scandal and cheap sensation. However, the lifestyle associated with chess didn't appeal to his adventurous nature, so he abandoned it, so he just abandoned it and took up something else. In this case, it was mountaineering, which did appeal, and his interest in the sport caused him to regularly vacation in the Alps, where his natural ability soon attracted the attention of other noted climbers. He travelled to Mexico, where he encountered another famed climber, Oscar Eckenstein, and it was from Eckenstein that he learned the possibilities offered by yoga. An iron will and the ability to concentrate the mind are essential when mountaineering, and for Eckenstein, yoga was the best way to achieve this. As it later turned out, it also created an intense spiritual awareness in Crowley. The experience gained in Mexico and the Alps inspired him to form a party of other mountaineers, including the formidable Eckenstein, to climb the perilous K2 peak. They were the first Europeans to actually attempt this hazardous ascent. During the strenuous climb, Crowley was stricken with influenza and malaria, and he was also badly affected by snow blindness to the point he was nearly blinded by it, in point of fact, permanently. But the other members of the expedition fared little better, and they too became ill. Despite his determination, this eventually proved too much, and when the expedition reached an altitude of 20,000 feet, they decided to abandon the climb. It was during the privations of his many climbs that he first experienced revelations regarding his spiritual needs. He claimed that these revelations and visions took the form of personal contact with the fallen angel Satan. Now, whether this was due to hypoxia induced by low oxygen levels is unknown, but it's equally possible he experienced a yoga-induced altered state of consciousness. His thirst for occult knowledge was paramount, and as soon as he returned to England, Crowley frequented bookshops seeking information on black magic. And the first book he bought was, perhaps appropriately, called The Book of Black Magic, penned by A.E. Waite, who was already a member of the occult society of the Golden Dawn. This was an organisation that Crowley was later to join and eventually dominate. But he found the book disappointing, and he considered that spells and incantations described in it were not nearly impressive or powerful enough for him. This was not at all what he wanted, and perhaps needed, far from it, because Crowley much preferred the strong, dark, Gothic imagery of demons, devils, and debauchery, and he certainly did his best to live up to it in his latter years. Nevertheless, he thought there were hidden undertones in the text of the book, hinting at another more shadowy truth, perhaps. Some other organisation that concealed dark and ancient truths and venerated other and much older entities and deities. Crowley wrote to Waite, who suggested that he obtain a book called The Cloud Upon the Sanctuary, written by the 18th century German mystic Karl von Eckarthausen. The book described the workings of exactly such an organisation, not a satanic cult, but rather a religious group claiming to possess the powers of angels. Now, this is what Crowley wanted to hear, and although they were not specifically mentioned by name, he immediately set about to attempt to contact them. However, in his search for occult knowledge at that time, he became a member of the Celtic Church, or the Celtic Church, not the Celtic Church, that'd be something entirely different, the Celtic Church. An organisation that operated in an atmosphere of fairies, wizards, and certain magical rites. And although this was not by any means what he wanted, it helped to fuel the desire for a much deeper knowledge. While continuing his search, he read whatever books on magic and alchemy he could lay his hands on. And as a result of his perseverance, he was eventually introduced to Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathers, who at that time, slipped the script here, who at that time was involved with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which is an organisation that exists to this day. And Crowley realised that at last his ambitions were being fulfilled. And as you may have noticed when Anne was speaking last week, that she first had her first encounter with Crowley at the organisation where the Theosophical Society used to meet at 28 Great King Street. Now, the Golden Dawn had a temple in that building. It was called the Golden Dawn Amun-Ra Temple number 6. Crowley was in the building several times when he actually ran it. But we'll move on from there just now, and we can talk about that maybe later. In many ways, Crowley's and Mathers were kindred spirits. Both were passionately interested in ritual, both were Freemasons, but more importantly, both were fascinated by the possibilities and real powers operated by magic. After his initiation into the Golden Dawn in 1898, he was given the secret name of Frater Perdurabo, meaning I shall endure. The membership of the Golden Dawn included such prominent and talented figures as Algernon Blackwood, W.B. Yeats, Arthur Machen, Sax Rohmer, and Bram Stoker, who was obviously the creator of Dracula. Shortly after becoming a member, the magician bought an apartment in Chancery Lane in London, where he set aside 2 rooms to serve as temples for the practice of magic, both black and white. Crowley had a willing insistence in his endeavours from his chosen flatmate and fellow member of the Golden Dawn, a guy called Allan Bennett. And while at the apartment, they claimed to have achieved results almost from the beginning. On one particular occasion, after locking the temple doors and going for a meal, on his return he found that the doors were wide open and the furniture was disturbed and overturned, showing all the signs of poltergeist activity. His mastery of the rituals developed by a magician called Abramelin was later to feature in a notorious 6-month-long ceremony performed by Crowley and his followers at Beliskin House on the banks of Loch Ness. This is how the actual house looks now. It's burned down not that long ago, and there was a crowdfunding page set up to try and get it rebuilt. Anyway, that is by the by. But we will be returning to the house a little later on. Crowley continued his magical path and became even more flamboyant in both his public and private life. And to achieve his desires, he began using opium and cocaine in industrial quantities. At first to enhance his elevated spiritual state, and simply because he had become addicted to it. In 1909, he had befriended another aspiring occultist called Victor Neuberg, who wanted to become his apprentice. It was during this period that he attempted one of the most dangerous of all the rituals ever performed. Along with Neuberg, he tried to raise the demon Chronozon. It was a project that tested both men to their absolute limits. Now bear in mind, we only have Crowley's word that this actually happened as described. The ritual was performed deep within the Algerian desert, and the ceremony involved magical diagrams, animal sacrifice, and incantations from a particularly notorious grimoire called the Grimoire of Pope Honorius. You should Google that sometime. It was actually considered to be one of the most horrific collections of magical spells ever written by Pope Honorius, as the title suggests. Crowley claimed that the demon manifested before them bellowing the words Zazas, Zazas, Nastanda, Zasa. These are utterances that are believed to open the very gates of hell itself. The whole thing developed into a ferocious magical battle between the demon, Crowley, and Neuberg as Chronozon sought to enter the magical protective circle that drawn round the sand round about them. The struggle continued until the power of the blood sacrifices diminished and the demon was forced to return to its lair and the battle was finally over. However, it didn't sort of end there. After its completion, Neuberg was almost insane, and some say that Crowley remained affected by the ritual for the rest of his life. His relationship with Neuberg continued until his pupils suggested that they abduct, murder, and dismember a young woman and offer her remains to the god Thoth. Now, even a dedicated magician occultist like Crowley knew where to draw the line. He drew his line here. He said, no, that's it. We're not having any more of that. And he quickly ended the association and more or less showed Neuberg the door. There could be no doubt whatsoever that Aleister Crowley was utterly dedicated to becoming an accomplished magician, and he began studying and practicing the magic of Abramelin, who was a previously forgotten magician, but references of whom had been unearthed by MacGregor Mathers in the records at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. Here we see Beliskin House again. That was when Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin had the place, because Jimmy Page was a dedicated Crowleyite, if you like, and he amassed quite a pile of artifacts belonging to Crowley, spent a lot of money on it in point of fact. And it's also been suggested, this is a matter of interest, that some of the imagery in Led Zeppelin, some of the imagery in a DVD they made of a DVD called The Song Remains the Same, show Page enacting different aspects of Crowley and magic. I've actually watched this DVD, and there are sort of cutaways of Page doing something, inverted commas. It's not clear what he's doing, but it's not really part of the song. So this could well be right. He was actually trying to enact it, but eventually Page gave up the house because it was getting to, he thought it was getting a bit risky because one of his mates was staying there, sort of looking after the place, sort of fire watching it, if I wanted a better word. And his mate wasn't too happy about being there either because there was something happening in the house and it was upsetting his wife and kids. So I think Crowley, I think Page eventually has sold the place, his mate moved out. At any rate, getting back to the Abramelin rituals. These did not rely on pentagrams or any of the other traditional tools of magical ritual and were almost mystical by comparison. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a little drink. The lengthy ceremony involved almost continual prayer at an isolated holy place set aside for the purpose. In this case, it was Beliskin House. If the ceremony, which supposedly involves turning 40 demonic entities back to God, was successful, the outcome was the materialization of the magician's guardian angel. When he commenced the full Abramelin ritual, a strange shadow descended over the house, requiring the use of artificial light even during the day. And one of the many precautions taken involved sprinkling fine sand on the broad marble terrace that overlooked Loch Ness. Crowley claimed this was the only way to tell if there were spirits present because they disturbed the sand as they moved around. And once again, wraith-like figures attracted by the ritual were glimpsed flitting around the grounds in the building. Unfortunately, while the ritual was in progress, the sorcerer was informed of leadership issues within the Order of the Golden Dawn, and he hurriedly left Boleskine House to join Mathers in Paris, but unfortunately he left the ceremony incomplete. It was a serious mistake, and villagers from the area reported strange and earthly shapes in the woodlands surrounding the house and estate, and there are still reports that this is the case. Although he did eventually return and complete the ritual and materialise his guardian angel, in this case Iowa, sometimes called Lamb, the stories concerning the house and the estate and its reputation persist to this day, and even now local people regard the area with deep suspicion and unease. Through his talents and personality, Crowley soon became leader of the Golden Dawn, the first in Britain and finally in Paris, by which time he had become extremely fascinated by some of the aspects of the type of magic it used, and how this could be altered to suit his own ideas. Then in 1912 he became involved with yet another occult group, the Ordo Templi Orientis, or the OTO, a group that practiced what is called tantric magic. This particular organisation, which he introduced to Britain, modelled themselves on the Knights Templar, actually got nothing to do with the Knights Templar, I can assure you, and the sacrilegious interpretation of their rituals. The OTO rituals were rooted in the philosophy of Tantrism, which is a mystical offshoot of Hinduism that embraced the philosophy that once union with the universe is achieved, then the gateway to true spirituality is revealed. Still seeking ways to increase his magical abilities, he obtained specific permission from the Egyptian authorities to meditate overnight in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, and at dusk, he and his wife entered and began to meditate. And again, we've only got Crowley's word for this. When Crowley extinguished the lights, he and his wife Rose watched in amazement as blue light started to emanate from the walls of the tomb, sufficiently bright to allow him to read from certain works dedicated to Thoth. His wife entered a deep trance and became possessed by some ancient entity, and she said, "They are waiting for you." And she told him that the Egyptian god Horus was angry with him for abandoning the Abramelin ritual a few years previously. Crowley asked his entranced wife certain questions for which he should have had no ready answers. They were extremely technical questions that were revealed a magical ritual, and she knew nothing about it. But the entity possessing it supplied all the correct responses, so he assumed that she was actually channeling something. As the night passed, the eerie illumination from the walls continued, and it only faded as the dawn arrived. The following day, he took his wife to the Cairo Museum, where she was still slightly entranced. It wasn't major, but she was slightly entranced, where they wandered among the exhibits, and the magician watched her reactions. She stopped and pointed at an unmarked carving of Horus, and the magician was amazed to see that it bore the catalogue number 666. This carving was taken off display some years ago, but actually it's turned up again, and it still bears the same number, 666. Unfortunately, by this time, Crowley's inheritance was almost exhausted, and he was forced to take steps to earn an income, actually work for a living. Now, although he was a talented poet and had sold several collections of his works, this was not enough to maintain his lifestyle and support his increasing drug habit. This was unfortunate, since his poetic and literary skills were considerable, and this is quite apart from the serious work on magic that he had produced. The books are still regarded as some of the finest examples of magical writing ever produced, and they are still in print today and get regarded as modern grimoires. Magic in Theory and Practice is a particularly good example, and the thing is, these books can actually be read and worked upon, because most of the magical books and grimoires that are out today are very obscure, very difficult to read pieces of literature, deliberately so. It's to stop people that are only messing about actually getting involved in it because they harm them might do it themselves more than anything else. However, at the time of their original publication, they were considered too evil and saw their works, and they did not sell well. He solved this by selling memberships of the Ordo Templi Orientis, or the OTO. This was a mistake, as it only served to dilute the magical purpose for the organisation by voyeurs, and those who were only interested in the erotic aspects rather than the serious nature of the rituals. He also gave public performances of the magical rites of Eleusis, in a London theatre. The public popped to see it, which initially at least produced a steady source of income. Eventually, interest waned, and this source of income also dried up. So he wrote a semi-autobiographical work, you know what I mean, entitled The Diary of a Drug Fiend, which was deliberately written as much to shock as to entertain. As a result of this, he had great difficulty in getting a publisher to accept the work, let alone print it. And he also produced some fictional works. The most notable was called The Moonchild, in which, drawing on his first-hand magical experience, he produced a genuinely frightening and readable work. You will find that The Moonchild crops up a little later on in another context, so it can't have been all that fictitious. Although supposed to be a work of fiction, as we shall see, as I've just said, it was perhaps an example of unexpected prophecy. In the early 1900s, he moved to America in an attempt to replenish his finances by once again publicly performing the rites of Eleusis. He reckoned that since the English performances were financially successful, then America, which potentially had a much larger audience, would be more successful still. At the outbreak of the First World War, Crowley offered his services to British intelligence, but he was rejected, and he took a job writing for a pro-German news sheet called The Fatherland. He later claimed to be acting on behalf of British intelligence in order to lull the Germans into thinking he was sympathetic, but this once again was a strange precursor of what was still to come. The magician was still not welcome in his own country, and in 1920 he and some followers, including his what he called his Scarlet Woman, in this case a woman called Leela Waddle, they decided to set up a magical commune at Cefalù on the island of Sicily. So an old and isolated farmhouse was purchased and renamed the Sacred Abbey of Theleme. It was just a dump, but allowed him to develop and perfect his own brand of magic. The name is actually highly revealing because in the Greek language, the word Thelema means love, or agape, which indicates unconditional magical love. The group continued to perform their magical work until the authorities in the Mussolini-led fascist government heard rumours regarding the ceremonies held at the Abbey. These claims were made because of the fear and superstition of the locals, who did not approve of anything that was related to the Abbey or Crowley or his followers. The end finally came when one of his disciples died drinking contaminated water. This later appeared as reports in the British press that it had been cat's blood. It wasn't, it was actually contaminated water, but the press wanted to stir it up, so cat's blood it became. This event, along with increasing interference from the fascist government, forced Crowley and his followers to close the Abbey and leave. These are some interior shots. These are still there inside the Abbey because people still go and actually dig this place out and take pictures of it. That's another one, another mural, and more of the interior. All you can see, it's actually just falling to bits. Because despite its fearsome reputation, the remains of the farmhouse still stand to this day with faded magical symbols painted on the interior walls, as you can see. And the ruins have become a place of pilgrimage for many occultists who still follow his style of magic. The local people completely shun the place and still tell fearful tales of monsters and demons who they say still haunted the Treherne remains. Crowley eventually returned to Britain during the 1930s, but the press and public still hated and despised him, and once again the world was almost at war. So there's quite enough wickedness around without any magical assistance. Once again he offered his services to the British intelligence, but this time because of his connections with influential European occultists he was more successful. And there were persistent rumours that Crowley had direct involvement with the interrogation of Rudolf Hess when he flew to Scotland and crash landed near Eaglesham, near Glasgow, supposedly to talk to the Duke of Hamilton. He was recommended to the authorities by another intelligence agent, none other than Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond, because some of what Hess revealed under interrogation appeared to have magical significance, and Fleming actually knew Crowley, and he knew he would know exactly how to deal with this, so he was drafted to do that. However, like many such events that did not fit standard patterns, it was an episode quietly buried away along with many other similar secrets surrounding this catastrophic world event. And I'll tell you, it will surprise you just how many official secrets have never been revealed about the First World War, especially some of the operations that were carried out. I'm just going to another wee drink, excuse me. Another war-related magical occurrence is said to have been organised by another magician, Gerald Gardner, who performed a series of rituals and spells designed to stop the Nazi war machine ever attacking the British mainland. Was it successful? Well, Gardner claimed to have raised a cone of power over the British Isles. And the fact that Adolf Hitler personally halted an already advanced planned invasion of Britain may supply the answer to that Britain. No one yet knows why he cancelled it, but he did. As the years passed and ill health brought about by decades of substance abuse took their toll, and he began taking a less prominent role and gradually faded from the public eye, but his knowledge was still indispensable and eagerly sought by those trying to unravel the mystery of the occult. Now here's two typical examples along with them. Some of them were very well-known figures. One was the scientist and occultist Jack Parsons, one of the founders of the Jet Propulsion Laboratories in Pasadena. Another was L. Ron Hubbard, the inventor of Scientology. Now, I could tell you a fair bit about Hubbard because I've got notes about it here. I could actually even tell you the great secret of Scientology, but I don't think we've actually got time because it just wanders into science fiction, which was the way he was. Of course, Hubbard was a science fiction writer and a con man to boot. Both Hubbard and his dubious reputation are ferociously guarded by the Scientologists, but almost all they say is, at best, self-serving and at worst less than truthful. He was a con man of the first order and Crowley absolutely loathed him. And eventually he made off a large sum of money intended to set up a business. They were going to go into business with Jack Parsons. And he also took Parsons' girlfriend with him. He was also hunted by the FBI as well over other matters. But this meeting of minds, which was the last major contribution Crowley made to the magical arts before he died, took place in 1947, a year which is memorable for various reasons. And this was when Parsons and Hubbard made ready to perform a ritual called the Babylon Working. It was a ceremony intended to allow the goddess Babylon to materialize in this reality. The ritual was another complex affair conducted in many phases, each requiring that the previous section be correctly followed. And much of the content came from other terrifying grimoire, the Lesser Key of Solomon. Believe me, there have been a few really horrific books written over the years, and that was another one, the Lesser Key of Solomon. As Parsons and Hubbard worked their way through the rituals, they kept Crowley informed of their progress. And during the conversations, he began to suspect the real purpose behind the Babylon Working was that Parsons and Hubbard were trying to create a moonchild, which is mentioned earlier. This magical creature was intended as the vessel by which the incarnation of Babylon, the goddess, would manifest. Now, Crowley knew the grave risks involved and advised them to stop, but they wouldn't. Whether they did succeed is open to question. Some say the ritual was a dismal failure, but a British occultist, the famous chaos magician Kenneth Grant, stated that the ritual was a spectacular success and the two magicians opened a portal allowing entities from another dimension to access the planet Earth. Grant demonstrated this by quoting the huge increase in UFO-related encounters immediately following the completion of the Babylon Working. Crowley was by now a pale shadow of his former self, and his constitution was wrecked and much diminished by his long-term use of cocaine and heroin. Now almost flat broke, he was used to eking out an existence in humble accommodation in a boarding house in the town of Hastings on the south coast of England. During these final few years, he confined his magical practice to entertaining small children with a few conjuring tricks. Many of them actually called him Uncle Allister. It was almost as if he was seeking a measure of contrition for his earlier ways, although it was unlikely he actually regretted any of them. Although not an easy man to like, he lived his life according to his beliefs and in many ways made the world a richer place for it. Perhaps he was born out of his time because I'm pretty sure if Crowley had been lived today and lived the way he did, he would have slotted neatly into the lifestyle of excess that become the standard for rock stars and other performers. What success and notoriety might have been enjoyed if in the more unlikely liberated 60s and 70s? However, it was not to be, and when he finally succumbed to illness and addiction, even in death, he still managed to attract the disapproval of the authorities. At his cremation in Brighton, on the 1st of December 1947, the eulogy at his cremation, which was read to the assembled congregation, was his self-penned hymn to Pan. In it, there's much talk of ranting, raving, raping, and ripping, which is absolutely typical of the man and the kind of work he did. The local authorities, no doubt much to his pleasure had he been around, were suitably appalled, and outraged and vowed never again with such an outrageous reading to ever be permitted in his premises. No doubt the old sorcerer would have been hugely delighted at the response. His ashes were never found. His ashes were never found, and they were thought to have been taken to America, but there is no trace of them. It's likely that his ashes were not placed in a set spot due to the well-founded fear of pilgrimages that would be made to his site. For all the vilification heaped upon him during his life, nothing could really break his spirit and prodigious ego. Call him a demon, call him a hero. It's unlikely that a man like Aleister Crowley will ever be seen again. And that, ladies and gentlemen, just about covers it. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. That's excellent. So I'm going to, that's great. I'm going to hand over to the audience for questions. I'm sure there's lots of questions given that full account of Crowley's life. So if you want to ask a question, you can either wave at me or you can raise a little blue hand electronically. That's down at the bottom of the screen. You just raise a blue hand and I'll see you that way, or wave to me and I'll find you if you've got a question for Brian. So let me just see if I've got any hands up here. I'm looking for blue hands. Oh, here's Tamariska. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself, Tamariska.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Hi, how are you? You're on to Brian.
Hi, Brian.
Hi. Hi.
Thank you for your presentation. I have a question. I was told by somebody that did an awful lot of reading and research on Aleister Crowley that on his deathbed, he actually did voice some regrets of things that he had done. Is this true?
I tend to doubt it. I don't think Crowley ever regretted anything that he did. No, I'm pretty sure, as I said at the conclusion there, that he would have been delighted that he caused such a furore from the authorities at the crematorium. So I very much doubt that he regretted anything, to be honest.
So did I. Thank you.
Yeah.
Where are you from, Tamarishka? Where are you calling in from?
Ontario, Canada.
Oh, very good. Glad to have you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Okay, who's next? Who's next for a question? Yep, no, that lady just says iPad, so I'll just ask you to unmute yourself and you can tell us your name. Hello,
Hi
what's
there.
your name?
My name's Leslie.
Hello, Leslie, you're on to Brian.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brian. That was really quite fascinating. I'm just curious. Yes, I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are on what Aleister would have made of the internet and how he could have used it to his advantage nowadays had he been around in this era.
I think he would have made an absolute fortune. He would have exploited it to the fullest. He would be carrying out ceremonies. I've no doubt he would have been doing this. You know, he'd actually be carrying out ceremonies, probably in closed loop somewhere, where people could relish what they were doing in the privacy of their own home while he sort of conducted the band. Yeah, I think Zoom would have been a great asset to him, I would imagine. Yeah, very good.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thanks for asking that. Yeah, good.
Thanks, Leslie. Okay, who's next? Who's got a question for Brian? There must be loads of questions after that presentation. No?
I know somebody's just asked, did Crowley reconcile his drug use?
Uh-huh.
A message just came up there. I didn't quite catch it. It went off again.
Oh, did it?
Yeah. I see it in chat.
I see. Right, okay. How did Crowley reconcile his drug use and its chaotic effect on mental faculties with the rigour and discipline required for the rituals and practicing magic. That's from Sylvia. Do you want me to read that again, Brian?
No, I got
Okay,
that.
you got that? Okay.
I don't think the drugs affected him in any way at all, other than he became addicted to them. But I think they actually enhanced what he did. If anything, if it was possible, I think they actually further removed his inhibitions, and he just went about what he did and just did it. No, I don't think the drugs actually affected him. Yes, he became addicted, but the man had the constitution of a horse. Otherwise, when he was taking industrial quantities of drugs over a number of years, it would have killed a lesser man. So he was like an extremely strong, very powerful man for his time, and he lived at quite a decent age, given what he did. So I don't think the drugs had any effect on him whatsoever, quite frankly. So I don't believe so.
Okay. I'm going to ask you a question while others are thinking of theirs. I mean, I remember reading about him some time ago now, but I distinctly remember about that ritual in the desert and trying to raise, is it chronozone?
Chronozone,
yeah. Now, tell me the purpose of that. Is that to gain the power of these evil entities, or why would he, what was he trying to do? What was his purpose, other than just achieve control? Do you think he was trying to take that power for himself?
In a word, yes. I think he thought, at least Neuberg, the guy that he was with, I think that Neuberg probably thought they could actually harness the power for their own purposes. But it did not end well, especially for Neuberg. But that was almost certainly the reason he was doing this. Mm-hmm. Could I just make another point here?
Please.
That, as you probably know, that a lot of people still practice Crowleyan magic, his style of magic, through the OTO and the Golden Dawn. This reminds me of H.P. Lovecraft, the 1920s, 1930s author, who's supposed to be a writer of horror fiction. In fact, he wasn't. He was actually a science fiction writer, if you actually look what he was writing about. But this guy created the perfect universe of his own that people actually invented. I mean, he created this fictitious book called the Necronomicon. Now, the Necronomicon was so good, or should have been so good, that people actually wrote one. Colin Wilson wrote one. There was somebody else wrote one as well. There was somebody else that actually created this book. And there are people who actually do or try and perform Lovecraftian magic, which is the blackest form of magic possible. It's demonic magic. And they try to communicate with these things. And I think they're extremely stupid. That they even thought of it, of getting in touch with these things. They actually invent them. They actually create these things themselves, I think, out of the deepest recesses of hell, if you like. They actually create them for themselves. And I think it's extremely stupid. But it's an example where people will follow an extreme form of magic. Crowley had an extreme form of magic, so he attracted his followers at the time, and he still attracts them. And H.P. Lovecraft, who wrote complete fiction, he created his own type of magic. Somebody else has written, have you heard of the Boleskine House Foundation? Yeah.
If so, what's your thoughts on the work being carried out?
I only caught the beginning, but I didn't catch it all.
Have you heard of the Boleskine House Foundation? It must be a fund, I take it. If so, what's your thoughts on the work being carried out? So I take it that's trying to refurbish the house.
That was what I mentioned earlier on in the presentation about the crowd. It's crowdfunding, basically, to try and build the place. I'm not sure why anybody would and what they want to do it for, but there was supposedly a room in the centre of the house that nobody could get access to, that was used for some of Crowley's rituals. But this is one of these sort of folk tales that grow up around places like that. I can't see that actually recreating the place would do any good, other than to if you like, build a place of pilgrimage that would be associated, unless somebody wanted to build a beautiful house or recreate purely to live at the side of Loch Ness, which is not a bad idea, but God only knows. God only knows.
Yeah, exactly.
It's more on the influence of Aleister Crowley on Gerald Gardner. Yeah, okay. Well, Gerald Gardner, I don't think had much to do with Crowley, if I'm being honest with you, because he had enough fish to fry. He created the system of Wicca. That is solely attributed to Gerald Gardner, and I don't think he had anything to do with Crowley, and I don't think he would have gone down that road either, because Gardner's style of magic was nothing to do with that. It was a much lighter, if you like. It wasn't as dangerous, I don't think, because Wicca, I don't think, is actually essentially a dangerous form of magic. I think it's basically, it's nature, but it's nature based, and it's meant to honour the forces of nature. So I think it's relatively, and that's inverted commas, relatively harmless.
Okay, I'm just checking to see if there's any more comments. Any more questions from anyone? Oh yes, Sylvia, I'll just get you to unmute yourself. Okay, Sylvia, you're on to Brian.
Thank you. Yeah, just harkening back to Boleskine House, mainly because I'm originally from Inverness myself. Was there any particular reason for choosing that site to live in and work in when he did? Was there anything to do with any kind of astrological or sort of navigational bearings that had a kind of there was a locus, a particular sort of locus?
Yes. The answer to that is yes, and I'll tell you exactly what it was. I was talking to Barry Fitzgerald today, who Anne knows.
Yeah.
We were talking about this very thing. We were talking about Boleskine House. Now, it turns out that Boleskine House and that whole area is sitting right on top of an immensely powerful geomagnetic anomaly. Okay? So it's not surprising that stuff happens there, because it happened there before Boleskine House was built. And not just in Boleskine House, but in the surrounding area. That it was notorious for, if you like, Loch Ness Monster. Put it that way, the Loch Ness Monster. You've got all that stuff going on there. I'm pretty sure it was to do with the fact of this geomagnetic anomaly, because you tend to find the areas where there are geomagnetic anomalies. Skinwalker Ranch is another example, powerful geomagnetic anomaly. There's one right under, or right on top, or right under, not on top of it, right under Boleskine. And that is probably why that Crowley took it. Incidentally, it's also been found, and you can ask Barry about this, he did some checking, and he found that the majority of weapons factories are built on geomagnetic anomalies, negative ones, because you get negative ones and you get positive ones. And the strange thing about Boleskine is, it's a positive geomagnetic anomaly, not a negative one. So why the sort of hassle occurred there, it shouldn't have done, but it did. But it was possibly the actual power inherent in the place that attracted Crowley to it. Plus, he needed an isolated installation to carry out the Abramelin ritual, and obviously Boleskine was ideal to do so.
Now that's interesting you should say that. Thanks for your question, Sylvia. That's interesting you should say that as well, Brian, because of course I was speaking last week about me and my group encountering Crowley in what became the Theosophical Society buildings in Great King Street, where Mathers and Crowley set themselves up. Now, I believe as well that it's no accident that we're in that particular location, because I do believe that there's something about that location that makes it conducive for these sorts of energies, let's say. So, yeah. Any more final questions? We've got a few minutes left. Do we have any more questions from anyone about this weird Aleister Crowley? We had a lot of questions last week about him, certainly from spiritualists concerned that there is thinking that says there's no such thing as evil and everything's good and positive, and we're hearing tonight about the other side. Any questions on that? Tell me, lastly, Brian, you're very involved in ufology and investigations to do with UFOs. So you mentioned in your talk there about opening up a portal or a doorway that increased the prevalence of UFOs. So is that continuing all the time? Is that why we see more and more of them?
The answer to that is, this would require a complete presentation on this alone, because, no, I'm not being funny about this. I should make it clear that in the field of ufology, I'm looked upon as a heretic, okay, because I don't accept the standard term. I don't believe UFOs are from other star systems. I think they're interdimensional vehicles. I think they're coming from other realities, and I've got good reason for saying that. Also, the reason that UFOs aren't seen so often now is because the US Air Force and other organizations have stopped building aircraft that created them. The U-2 was a prime example. When it had first appeared, it was a whole spate of UFO samples. When the stealth fighters first appeared, UFOs, the bombers that appeared, you know, that Delta, not Delta wing, but the flying wing bomber, I can't remember its name offhand. When it first appeared, UFOs, they don't need them anymore. So this is why UFO sightings have decreased. They haven't stopped. But the ones that have continued tend to be more in the field of high strangeness events, where people are encountering things that in any other context could be taken as spirits, but in other contexts could be taken as extraterrestrial entities. And I think that aspect of it is never going to go away, because it didn't sort of begin in 1947. It's always been here. But it's just, we have to categorize it within the culture that encounters them. And our culture tends to be a technological one. So hence, it has to view in technological terms. And the beings it encounters have to be extraterrestrials, not spiritual. They have to be something else entirely. And I tend to think that the whole phenomenon shapes itself, as I said, around the culture that encounters it. For example, you're going to be talking about Chinese ghosts on Friday. Yeah, okay, Hector. I think you'll find that the tales of Chinese ghosts reflect Chinese culture, because they just do. It's just the culture that actually encounters them. But I know I'm being a bit round about the houses here, but the subject of ufology, I mean, I'm not really a ufologist. I was. Then I moved out of that field. But since I've been getting more involved with Philip Mantle, I've taken another more studied look at it, shall we say.
Okay, well, thank you for that. So just to wrap up, I'm going to sort of give the warning here, like you get when you've been watching all those sorts of scary films that says, don't be afraid. You're very unlikely to encounter Crowley or anyone like him. So don't be afraid out there. And thank you for joining us. And before you go, however, let me tell you what's coming up tomorrow. So we've got a special evening on tomorrow evening, 7:30, same place here, 7:30, and I will be interviewing Paul Jacobs. So international medium, tutor, author, tutor at the Arthur Findlay College, got his own school in Hanover in Germany, been on telly. So if we've got any budding mediums out there who want to ask him a question, he will be on with me tomorrow night at 7:30. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Brian Allan. Thank you for your virtual clap here, Brian. Thank you for being with us and being our guest here this evening. Let me just state again, all our speakers and mediums give their time for free to help with our funds. So if you can give us a little donation, that would be brilliant. Even £2 or £3 keeps the centre going, because we bring you all this online for free since our building is locked down just now. So thank you if you've done that in advance, and look forward to seeing you again at something else soon. So thank you everyone, and good night. And thank you once again.
Good night. Glad to have been here. Thank you very much. Okay, God bless. Take care.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Bye everyone.
Bye.